Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors. And today I have two of my favorite people. They love to do presentations for us. And today we're going to be talking about the gut-brain connection. I have Michelle Clark here with me today, along with Jill Jones. I know many of you know these two ladies. They always come and really present about really do the research on their topic. So they pick a topic and then they dive deep into that research and then they share it with us. Again, as I said, we're going to be doing the gut-brain connection. So welcome, ladies. How are you today?
Good.
Good. Everything's going okay so far.
So far, so good.
So far, so good, right?
So I'm going to go ahead and put your presentation up so that you can get started. You do have an online audience along with your in-person audience. So if you have questions about the presentation, please put them in the chat and then I'll address those afterwards. So I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, and I'll be doing the presentation and then Michelle will follow me with a workshop for the in-person people that are here. And we have a full house, it looks like.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning, taking time out of your busy day to be here. I really appreciate that. This is the third talk I've done on the gut in the last year. And the reason is there's so many different aspects to it, and what's going on in our gut affects a lot of what's happening in the rest of our body. And today's talk is about the gut-brain connection. So the spin on it this time will be, how does what's happening in our gut affect our brain, and vice versa, how does the brain affect how we feel in our gut? And of course, we'll be talking about the gut microbiome, those bugs in our gut. So here are the topics. As I said, this is my third time this year, so I have spoken and defined the gut microbiome for you before. But because there are many people who are new to this, I will be reviewing the core concepts, because the gut microbiome, the bugs in our gut, play a significant role in our health. And so then I'm going to walk through the digestive process, the different steps in digestion, and explain how that works. And then I'll talk about how the gut bacteria talk to our immune system. How many have heard that 70% of our immune system is in our gut? Yes, and there's a good reason for that. So I will be explaining that there's a lot of crosstalk between our brain and the immune system and the gut microbiome in our immune system. Then I'll give you a definition and characteristics of what a healthy gut microbiome and a healthy gut would look like. And of course, the bidirectional communication, that means going both ways. The brain is always talking to the gut's always talking to the brain. They call that the gut-brain axis. You've probably heard that term. But that involves our immune system, all the nerves. We have a whole nervous system in our gut. There's more nerves in our gut lining than there are in our spinal cord. And so that's a pretty complex topic. I think Michelle and I spent twice as much time putting this material together. There's a lot of new research. There's some of the research I'll be presenting today was reported out just this year. And the oldest research, it's 2021, and that's been updated. So there's a lot of new material coming out constantly about the brain and the gut health. And then, of course, general principles for guidelines for a healthy gut. So here are the core concepts for the gut microbiome. The definition of a microbiome is the community of microscopic organisms that we have on our body. Actually, a microbiome, we have bacteria, we have fungi, we have viruses all over our body, but the most of them are in our gut, and especially our lower gut, our colon. And microbiome includes their genes. So it's the organisms and their genes. Diversity is a term you'll hear over and over again. That's having a big variety of different types of bacteria or organisms. If people who have a lot of different species of bacteria in their gut tend to be more healthy. They do a lot for our health, and so having different species, different strains helps a lot. And then food, of course, food is the most important factor that determines what type of bacteria we have in our gut. All of the sources of research for this presentation today are pretty much out of these two top scientific journals, Nature and Cell. And they are rated at the top of 30,000 different science journals out there in the world. And so I'll be describing some of this research later. So let's talk about the gastrointestinal tract. That is the gut. Some of us think of the gut as just the stomach, but it's really starts in the mouth and goes all the way down to the rectum. It's like one big long tube, a 30-foot tube. Our small intestines are 22 feet, and our colon's about 5 or 6 feet. So it's a very long tube that food passes through before it exits our body. Digestion starts in the mouth whenever we start chewing on something like an apple or something. The digestive juices come in and start breaking food down in our mouth. Then it travels down the esophagus. The job of the esophagus is to just get the food from the mouth to the stomach. That's all it does, is move food down. Then when it gets in the stomach, there's more digestive enzymes. There's a very strong acid that comes out in the stomach when you have food in there. And the purpose of that is to kill any pathogens that could be in there. So it's a really strong acid in our stomach. And there's also a churning motion, like a washing machine churning, because it's breaking down the food particles. Once it's broken down and almost into a liquid form, then that food moves into the small intestines. And that's where the nutrients are absorbed. So it's broken down into fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and then all the vitamins, minerals. That all gets absorbed out through the intestines and into our bloodstream, and it travels to the cells in our body. So most of the nutrients out of the food is absorbed in the small intestine. But in the colon, what happens is, well, anything left over, including fiber, because our small intestines doesn't digest fiber. So the fiber goes down into the colon, and by this time, there's a lot of liquid in it. I guess there's not much liquid left over, but there is enough liquid that'll be absorbed. And so the colon makes a stool to get ready to exit the body. But that's when the gut bacteria go to work. So we have those bugs in our gut. There's 38 trillion of them, all different kinds, and they are consuming the fiber. And the main thing they do, though, is they make chemicals, thousands of different chemicals that our body needs for our health. So the gut microbiome, then, the gut microbiome is all of the bacteria in our gut, the microscopic organisms in our gut. There's 38 trillion, I said, along with their genes. Now, because we carry, each of us as an individual will have about 200 to 500 different species in our gut. And each species has a different set of genes. So that's why you see in a human, we'll only have like 22,000 genes. But with all of these bacteria in our gut, that's an additional 3 million genes that we've added. And those genes are telling our body what to do. So the genes kind of give instructions on the function. They determine the function of these gut bacteria. And because we have so many and so many different kinds, everybody's gut bacteria is unique. So the gut microbiome, some people call it an organ because all these microbes together weigh 3 to 5 pounds. It's hard to believe. They weigh as much as our brain. But all of them together, they're unique in everybody. They're like a fingerprint. So we might have maybe 1/3 that's the same, but even twins, there's only about 1/3 that's the same in twins. Most of them are very different. I'm going to get some water here. Sorry, I'm just so dry. It's dry weather. So now let's start talking about the connection between the gut and the brain. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of neurons in the gut lining. That's called the enteric nervous system. And it can operate independently of the brain. So all by itself, it's like reflex circuits in there. All these different nerves are pre-programmed and they know what to do. They know their job whenever we eat food and they need to process food through our body. So one of the things they do is they trigger all these muscles in our gut to move food through the body. So motility is really about movement. It's moving things through. And then they also trigger different organs and different parts to bring out the digestive enzymes. For instance, the pancreas will be bringing out enzymes, sending enzymes into the gut. They also trigger blood flow because they bring blood flow, they increase the blood in the small intestines because that's where nutrients are absorbed. So they want to pick up those nutrients and send it to our cells. And then nutrient absorption is kind of just what I said. It's the gut wall is porous enough to let the right nutrients through, but keep any toxins inside the body. And so the enteric nervous system is connected to the brain through a large group of nerves called the vagus nerve. How many people heard of the vagus nerve? Okay, so it's really multiple nerves grouped together and they just call it one vagus nerve. But you can see the different extensions, how it gets down into our gut. The vagus nerve goes to all of our internal organs. And like for instance, our lungs and our heart and our liver and all the different organs. And all of those organs are reporting information back to the brain. And so in this case, we're talking about the gut. While most of those extensions there from the vagus nerve, most of those nerves are going into the gut because there's a lot of action going on there, especially when we're eating something. And so the vagus nerve sends more than 80% of the information to the brain. And the brain is only sending maybe 20% or less information back down because, like I said, the gut can operate independent of the brain. So anyway, the type of signals, when you think if you're eating something, mechanical signals would be your stomach starts to stretch out whenever you're eating something. And so you know you're getting full. Your brain knows you're getting full because the vagus nerve is sending that information up. And also, even when it goes into the small intestine, that'll stretch out a little bit. Also, what happens is hormones are released. That gets sensed and gets sent up to the brain. And I mentioned different nutrients. So the brain will be getting signals from the vagus nerve, whether it's sugar or fat or carbohydrates or what's happening in the gut. The gut microbiomes, the gut microbes, also send information up the vagus nerve. They send different signals up to the brain. And then the vagus nerve, when it starts to send signals out to the organs, its job is really to keep homeostasis, keep everything in balance. That's pretty much the job of the vagus nerve. So it gets involved, for instance, if we were stressed and digestion started to slow down, then the vagus nerve would try to get in there and relax things and get the blood flowing and tweaking the whole digestive process. So now this is a live picture. It's a slide of somebody's gut. And what it's showing, well, it's actually a cross-section of the colon. And what it's showing is here, it's showing all of the bacteria that happen to be in the gut. So you can see every one of those little rods is a bug, and they're all tightly packed in the colon. In the small intestine, there aren't that many, so you wouldn't see all this tight packed little rods in there. But in the middle here is our mucus layer, and that acts like a fence. So this mucus layer is there to protect the bacteria from touching the human cells. Because right below here, those blue circles, those are all nucleus of human cells, of the colon cells. That's the first layer of human cells in the gut lining. Is that making sense?
So where do the toxins fit into all of this?
The what?
Toxins.
Oh, well, we're going to talk about that. Okay. So I just want to be sure everybody's on the same page with me here. That little cross section, that slide that I showed you, is just a cross section of the gut lining right there of the colon. And as far as toxins go, everything we put into our mouth has some kind of contamination. And so when it gets down to the stomach, that's where that acid tries to kill things, but some things can get through. And that's why this wall is here. There are different layers in the wall that form a protection that protect us from letting anything getting into our system. So now I'm going to go back. That slide that we saw, the picture, the live picture that had the gut bacteria in it, this is a cartoon image of that, so I can talk about it and explain more about those layers. So this is what you saw on the slide. The gut bacteria, the microbes right there, they are inside the gut and inside the colon. And then next to it is the mucus layer. And then right below the mucus layer are these cells, and they're called epithelial cells. And so what happens is the food particles are coming through, and hopefully it's a lot of good fiber. The gut bacteria are eating that fiber, and when they do that, they produce something called short-chain fatty acids. Now, I know it's a long word, but I'm going to be mentioning that a number of times throughout this presentation because it's an important kind of substance that's produced by gut bacteria. So anyway, they eat the food, they produce short-chain fatty acids that then feeds these epithelial cells. So those chemicals that are produced by the bacteria are actually providing energy to these cells. So they're necessary to keep these cells doing their function. And then these cells, their job is to make more mucus. Some of them make more mucus. So it's like a continuous process where you could see some of the bacteria are eating away that mucus. And what can happen is if we don't have the right kind of bacteria in there and they're unbalanced and we have more bacteria eating the mucus away and it's not getting replaced, that's when we get into trouble. That's when things can leak in to our blood supply. So let's see here. So the other thing they do, these bacteria, some of the substance they're making are, they're proteins that make these cells stick together. And they act as another barrier. So you have the mucus, and then you have these epithelial cells stuck really tight together with special proteins made by the gut bacteria. Oops, let's see what happened here. So the point on this chart is that food is the main driver of the types of bacteria you have in the gut and the types of chemicals that are produced, and whether we have a good defense there, a protective barrier that keeps the toxins inside our body and allows the right nutrients to go through. And again, nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. So this layer of cells is all up and down our gut. So now, whatever food we eat, that's going to determine the type of bacteria in our gut. And those are called the chemicals produced by the gut bacteria are called metabolites. They're products of metabolism. So they're, instead of just chemicals, they're called metabolites. And what we eat is going to determine the chemicals that we have in our body. It's like a chemical factory. Before, people used to talk about the types of bugs in our gut, and now everybody's talking about the chemicals that are being produced and what are they doing for our body. So the gut microbiome will make vitamins. They make vitamin K and vitamin B12. They make a lot of the B vitamins, especially the ones that are water soluble. They also make enzymes. Now, what enzymes do is they help speed up metabolic processes. All those chemical reactions in our body, enzymes help speed up the process. And they make a lot of those. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. They make hormones or hormone-like substances. And they also have an impact on hormones. Like, for instance, they cause the release of appetite hormones like GLP-1. You hear a lot about that on TV now. And they make short-chain fatty acids. Neurochemicals, how many have heard that 90% of serotonin is made in your gut? No, just a few people. Well, some of the chemicals made in our brain are also made by those neurons in our gut, like dopamine, serotonin, a lot of different neurochemicals, and that affects our mood. I did a little fanfare here because these short-chain fatty acids are almost magical, what they do for our body. And they are a game changer on so many levels. And that's where people are spending a lot of time researching. They want to try to figure out how they can make a drug that acts like short-chain fatty acids. But there are no drugs out there that do this. In our own body, our cells can't make them. The only way we can get these is for the gut bacteria, the right gut bacteria. A lot of different species would make a lot of different kinds of these short-chain fatty acids. One of the things they do, as I mentioned, is build up that intestinal barrier so that we don't have leaks into our system. They regulate immune response. These substances are actually anti-inflammatory. So they try to keep our immune system from overreacting. Like, for instance, people get allergies. That's an overreaction of the immune system. It controls blood glucose levels. As I mentioned, it triggers the release of GLP-1 and other appetite hormones, and that affects insulin levels. So it helps regulate our blood glucose levels. This is an interesting one. It helps maintain, has anybody heard the blood-brain barrier?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what this does, these substances, they repair and enhance the blood-brain barrier. They actually get into our bloodstream from our gut, go up to the brain, and reinforce that blood-brain barrier. And I'm going to show you a little video on that later. And I already mentioned the appetite hormones. So now here's the definition, and it took a while for people to agree on a standard definition. What is a healthy gut microbiome? It includes a large number of healthy species that can produce these short-chain fatty acids and fewer species that cause disease. Now, we're always going to have some number of bad actors in there, but if they're at a low level, they're not going to do any harm because we'll have enough good bacteria. So balance is very critical here. And the important thing to us is that if we just tweak our food a little bit or just make some small shift, it can change the whole balance of those gut bacteria and make us be healthier. So I want to bring back these cells, these epithelial cells again, because our blood-brain barrier is made up of different blood vessels like capillaries, and inside those capillaries, that's where the barrier is. When I say blood-brain barrier, that's inside the blood vessels in your brain, and they are lined with the same kind of cells that are lining our gut. And so these cells, collectively, they're called epithelial cells, but they specialize. They do different things. And so I mentioned some of them make mucus. Well, some of them make antimicrobial proteins that kill off any toxins before they could do any damage. They're responsible for absorbing nutrients. So they open up, remember I mentioned the tight junctions, they'll open that up and let nutrients go through, but then they close it up afterwards so the toxins stay in. And they also sense what nutrients are there. So these cells can tell exactly what's being absorbed. Is it a sugar? What type of sugar? Is it glucose or is it fructose? It knows in detail what's happening and sends that information to the brain. So we mentioned 70% of the immune cells are in our gut. There's another layer. Remember, this is the gut wall. There's another layer below the human cells that's like connective tissue that has our immune system in it. And the immune system, the cells are born in our bone marrow, but then they go to our gut to be trained. Because when our blood cells are first born, the immune system, they don't really know what the bad guys look like because good bacteria looks the same as bad bacteria. So they reside in the gut and the bacteria are actually training them. So there's crosstalk going on. I'm showing a cell actually reaching up into the mucus and taking samples and testing to see what's going on there. We also have our blood flow going through here, circulation. So if something leaks through, that could get into our circulation and cause problems. So what happens if something, if we have an imbalance of that bacteria? That's called, there's a word for that, it's called dysbiosis. But that's whenever we have an overabundance of the wrong kind of bacteria eating away at the gut lining. These cells can open up and let maybe chemical toxins through, or they can let other, even the bacteria themselves. That's really a bad situation. And then the nervous system, or the immune system reacts. It's going to cause inflammation. And if this is the condition, that's the condition of our gut, what happens is then we'll have chronic inflammation. And that chronic inflammation is in our bloodstream and goes to other parts of our body. So then what do you do? Hopefully we can get rid of the Pepto-Bismol. But I've certainly, I don't know about you, but I've had every one of these at some point in my life, starting as a child. And it turns out there are so many people that have gut problems today. It's become an epidemic. It's growing. And gosh, it was before COVID, so it was sometime in 2018 or something. One of the universities in Sweden did a global study. They looked at thousands of people in multiple countries, and at least 40% of that total were diagnosed with gut illnesses, and another 30% had problems. They just weren't diagnosed of a particular problem. But it keeps growing, and then it affects the rest of our body. So what can we really do about it? Well, these two professors at Stanford, they've done a lot of research on the gut microbiome, and they were asking the question, how can we increase diversity and improve immune health? We were always told to eat vegetables, eat plants, eat a lot of fruit, eat a lot of fiber. Is there anything more we can do? And they did an experiment where they had groups of people. It's falling apart. Oh well, we'll get that later. They had two groups of people. One group of people, they had them increase the amount of fiber they're eating in a day. So most people only eat, if you can believe it, only maybe 15 grams of fiber a day. That's kind of the average. And we're supposed to be getting 30 grams, and a variety, not just Metamucil, but a variety of different. So they had a group of people add more fiber to their diet. And that's all they did. They took their regular diet and they added about 20 grams more fiber to it. And then they had a separate group who, for their process, what they were supposed to do is just add fermented food, because fermented food is like yogurt, for instance, and there's a fermented milk called kefir. There are vegetables now like sauerkraut and so forth you can buy that have live bacteria in them, and they have to be refrigerated. They have to say live bacteria on the label of the container so that you know you're getting the real live bacteria. Well, the other group of people were told to consume up to maybe 4 servings of this fermented food a day, 4 to 6, as much as. Now, you don't have to eat a lot, maybe only a few ounces would be a serving. But anyway, they added yogurt, they added fermented tea, they added fermented vegetables. And so here's the results.
So we collected blood and stool longitudinally over that entire time. And the very simple analysis here is just to ask the question of what do these participants look like at baseline? What do they look like at the end of the study? And is there a change that's happened across the cohort? And the really big signal that was very impressive was there were 2 really for the fermented food group. One was an increase in microbiome diversity. So these people somehow increased the number of microbial bacterial species in their gut microbiome. And many markers of inflammation decreased over that same time. And in fact, even if we look at intermediate time points, so not just the beginning and end, but the intermediate ones as they were progressing, we see a gradual increase in diversity over the fermented food intervention and a gradual decrease in these inflammatory markers. So it's kind of the result that you would hope to see for a healthy dietary intervention.
Okay, so here's the results. Just by adding fermented foods to their diet, they were able to increase the number of bacterial species. That means increasing more of those short-chain fatty acids. And they decreased inflammation. If you've ever had a blood test and gotten an HSCRP reading on to give you an idea of inflammation in your body, that gets lowered as a result of eating this food. The high fiber group, the people that added a variety of plants to their diet, they had mixed results. They improved function of the bacteria, the good bacteria that were there. They had more good bacteria and so forth. So they made improvements, but they didn't increase the number, the different types of bacteria. They didn't increase the diversity. And as far as the immune response, that was dependent on the condition their guts were in to begin with. Some of them were in pretty bad shape, some of them were in good shape, so they really couldn't draw any conclusions from that. But as a result of that study, and I think it's caused a run on fermented tea called kombucha. Everybody's buying kombucha, everybody's eating fermented tea now. When this got reported, all of the, like Andrew Weil and everybody that's on social media started talking about it, and people started eating more and more of the fermented foods. And so the definition of live fermented foods, they say on the bottle or on the jar that they have live and active bacteria in them. So if you're going to pick any up, make sure that's on the label, and it always has to be refrigerated. You won't see it sitting on a shelf. And then prebiotics are what feed the bacteria. That's nuts and whole grains and anything that comes from a plant. But the best source when we want to get short-chain fatty acids are these fermented foods, fermented vegetables in particular, because these vegetables have bacteria on board. And then when they're put in the salt water, magic happens and they start to ferment and they start to make more bacteria and gases and so forth, and they start producing these short-chain fatty acids. So let me go back. Now let's talk about the brain. I've got another 15 minutes here before I want to, so I'll have to move a little quick. But anyway, I mentioned the enteric nervous system, or all those nerve cells in our gut. They're embedded in that cell wall. So you can see the gut, hollow organs aren't doing much. All the action's happening inside the wall. All of this stuff is inside the gut wall. And the way the vagus nerve is connected to this gut wall, the vagus nerve can talk directly to these epithelial cells when it's sensing what nutrients are there, and also having to do with appetite hormones. And it also talks to these nerve cells in our gut, the enteric nervous system. So a healthy gut microbiome, this is what it would look like. High diversity, a lot of different species of gut bacteria, a lot of short-chain fatty acids, thick mucus layer there, and a strong barrier. So now, what happens when we get out of balance? Well, this is kind of a review. A low fiber diet can cause this, but it could be other things. It could be chronic stress or something else going on that causes an imbalance of the gut bacteria. The mucus gets eaten away, and then toxins can get out into the bloodstream and activate our immune system. Yes?
Where in the, it's a nice picture, but where is it in the body? Where is that nerve?
Okay, this is in the gut lining. The picture I showed you of the gut, and I showed a cross section.
But from the brain to the gut, where's that in the body?
Well, the brain, these are little tiny things, but the brain, the wires or the fibers go straight in from your brain into your gut. The cell bodies of the vagus nerve are up here. And they have extensions that go down into our different
It
organs.
doesn't look like that.
Well,
I mean, it's not one thing, one big string.
It's on a previous, I think what she's wanting to see is the previous slide that showed, it was way near the beginning that
Oh,
showed where
yeah.
the biggest nerve was.
I'll have to do that a little bit later, whenever we wrap this up. Okay. All right, so now we've got inflammation. And what happens is there are immune cells in our brain. And so when the gut starts to cause this chronic inflammation, it can activate the immune system in our brain. And that's not healthy. That's when it starts to damage the blood-brain barrier. Here's all the diseases that are linked to inflammation. And you've probably heard of this, but systemic inflammation then can damage that blood-brain barrier. And it also can cause changes in our brain function, and I'll show you how that happens later. But I want to give you more information about the blood-brain barrier. I'm going to show you a little clip. And it's kind of hard to hear the voice on here because they put so much music in it. And the music is louder than the voice, and so, but at least you'll see the picture and kind of how things work.
To keep off foreign invaders, the brain lies in the membrane that lines the brain's blood vessels, known as the blood-brain barrier. All blood vessels are lined with endothelial cells. There are gaps to let molecules out of the blood vessel and into other tissues. But the endothelial cells that line the brain's blood vessels are really close together. That means only certain molecules can slip through and get out into the brain tissue. Some molecules, like water and oxygen, can cross the blood vessel wall and get into the brain. So can some fat-soluble substances like caffeine and alcohol. Other molecules the brain needs, like glucose, can hitch a ride into the brain tissue with the help of certain proteins. So by and large, the blood-brain barrier doesn't let most drugs through, which presents a big problem in medicine.
So what they're talking about is they're trying to design drugs that can get into our brain, but they can't make it through that barrier. But you see how it's a protective barrier. It's trying to keep any toxins out of our brain. So it's really important that we keep these blood vessels healthy. Now I want to show you an
But
interesting.
you can detox the brain and,
Okay, well we'll have to that. We'll talk about that later. But I just want to get through this so we can get to the workshop here. This is a cast, a resin cast of the blood vessels in our brain. And so what they did is they took a preserved brain in a lab and they poured liquid resin into the different blood vessels in our brain, and it hardened, and then they took away the brain tissue. So now you're able to see all these tiny little capillaries. This is how much blood is getting into our brain to bring nutrients to our brain. And so these are studies that are done, and what they're doing in both of these studies is they are trying to find a drug that can do what short-chain fatty acids do. They have recognized that the gut has these properties that can help our brain, and now they're trying to find something that can mimic short-chain fatty acids. When I mentioned this inflammation can alter brain function, it can affect our hippocampus, which is the center of our memory. And so that causes our brain to age. It can cause anxiety and depression and other problems. The other thing, if you don't have enough of the right bacteria, then we're not producing enough of those mood chemicals that I mentioned earlier. There can be a reduction in the happy chemical like serotonin or dopamine, which is needed for our sharpness, our mental sharpness. So these are there are about 30 different brain chemicals that are made in the gut by gut microbiome and by the enteric nervous system. These are just some of them that most of us have heard, and they're the ones creating our mood. So they have to be in balance. They do affect what's happening in our brain. And I'm going to play a real short video here.
What does GABA mean? It says on the bottom GABA. What does that?
That's a neurotransmitter. Okay, let's.
But the point is that particular gut microbiota can create dopamine in our gut that can get into our bloodstream and can generally change our baseline levels of dopamine within the brain and other areas of the body. I mentioned baseline levels of dopamine because, as I talked about on an episode all about dopamine, but I'll just repeat the basics here now, we have baseline levels of neurotransmitters and neuromodulators that act as sort of the level of the tide, the overall level, and then we can have peaks of dopamine that are created by behaviors or by ingestion of particular foods or drugs, etc. So Bacillus and Serratia tend to increase our baseline levels of dopamine. So it turns out that we are creating the right gut microbiome environment that these particular gut microbiota can thrive in, well then our baseline levels of dopamine will be elevated. And in general, that leads to enhancement of mood.
I hope he clarified that a little bit. I think he does a better job of explaining it than I do. How many people have heard about dopamine? Yeah. A lot of our medications we take might have dopamine in it, or serotonin, for instance, for depression or for different reasons. But our gut bacteria it's actually being produced in our gut along with the chemicals in our brain, and they affect each other and they affect our mood. Chronic stress is another one. Now, I've been mostly talking about how the gut affects the brain, but here's an example. If we're very stressed, and especially with COVID and what we had to go through there, some people still haven't recovered. That causes an overgrowth of harmful bacteria. And inflammation, and the whole cycle repeats. So the whole idea here is that we can heal our gut, and we can do some very simple things that can create the right mood chemicals, can create the short chain fatty acids. And another study was done. This was done by Harvard, Stanford, and King's College London. And this got a lot of press. It was published in the big science journals. But what they were able to do, they were able to link specific types of gut bacteria, communities of gut bacteria. They could link it to the type of food we eat. And they could also link those same types of bacteria to health markers like our blood cholesterol level, LDL, triglycerides, high blood pressure, all those different health markers. There are certain groups of bacteria that are linked to healthy ones, and there are certain groups that are linked to unhealthy markers. But what they learned here, and I think the big story that came out of this and got a lot of press, was the damage done by ultra-processed foods. It became a new food category because we all eat processed foods. You can't avoid it. We cook and so forth. But it's what we have done, what they have reported out is that ultra-processed foods, they have non-food chemicals in them. The chemicals that they are made in the manufacturing process, our gut bacteria don't recognize. So they're manufactured ingredients. If there's a lot of steps in creating a specific food like Cheetos or something like that, there's 12 manufacturing steps and all these different special chemicals that get added to them. That's what causes gut dysbiosis. It causes some of these symptoms. So ultra-processed food, the definition of that is they alter the chemical structure of the food. It starts out as real food, but when you take away the fiber and you strip away all the nutrients and put in other chemicals, you're changing the whole structure. And then there's a long list of substances that they add, and these are industrial products, like emulsifiers, for instance. and defoaming agents. And what that does, like emulsifiers, helps keep, in mayonnaise, it helps keep the oil and the water together. It helps keep liquid together. And so we can't avoid it totally, but there are some guidelines in how much that we can safely eat. And now the last part of this is about cravings. I'm bringing back this slide because I mentioned that these cells can sense how much, whether we're eating sugar or fat or what substances we're eating, and they can send it up the vagus nerve. So whenever we eat sugar, and whether it's glucose or fructose or whatever kind of sugar, the vagus nerve picks that up, gets that information, and sends it up to the brain. And what happens is there's a reaction in the brain and dopamine gets released. And dopamine is the brain chemical that causes us to do it over and over again. It knows it got a reward, so it's the motivation chemical. It motivates us to go do it over and again. But it's all outside of our awareness. This is all happening at a subconscious level. It's happening in the gut. And they tested this. This was tested on humans, on people. And they had a way of fixing it so that you couldn't taste the sugar. It was only your gut could taste the sugar. And they still got this dopamine reaction. And now there has been research after that study that just came out in February of this year. They tested fat. And they wanted to see what would it do with fat. And it turns out there are different circuits. The vagus nerve can detect if we're eating fat, and it travels up to the brain on a different pathway, but it causes that dopamine release. It's a different pathway than the sugar, and sugar causes a dopamine release. So then they combined the two together. They gave, this happened to be done in mice. This was not done in humans, it was done in mice. But they gave mice a combination of fat and sugar in one food, same amount of calories, no additional calories, and they ate twice as much of the food, and there was more dopamine released. So that's what's happening to our food environment is all these snack foods, they're combining sugar and fat because they know we'll be driven to eat more of it. And then the ultra processing causes trouble as well. Our gut bacteria don't recognize it. So what can we do? I think I'm doing okay here. A few more minutes. Here are the guidelines. 2 to 4 servings of fermented foods a day. If you eat 2 to 4 servings, that will help increase the diversity and help increase the balance of the right kind of gut bacteria. 30 different plants. They've done a number of studies, and they found if you can get variety is really important. And it's easy to get variety because coffee counts as a plant, spices count as plants, and just in a lettuce mixture, the different kinds of lettuce. So anything different that you're eating that comes out of the ground, that helps grow these bacteria that make short-chain fatty acids. As far as ultra-processed foods, if we can eat less than 30% of our diet, because today adults are consuming about 60% ultra-processed food. That's the majority of what they're selling in the supermarkets. So if there's a way to just cut it in half, that's all we really need to do to help be healthier. And then antibiotics, of course, kill bacteria. But so we try to limit the use of antibiotics. If you need them, you have to take them. And after a course of antibiotics, the gut bacteria will grow back. But you don't want to continue to take them if you don't have to.
So does alcohol play a role then too?
Yes, well, I don't know the exact amount, but if you overconsume it, it would affect.
Gotcha.
What was the question?
It was about alcohol. And again, I'll take questions at the end. Okay, so here are the key messages, and I'll let you read through those. You have them in your notes. But the whole idea here is there are little things we do. If you look at those guidelines, they're pretty simple. It's not too difficult to add more plants. You can set 30 as a goal for a week, but just add more variety in what you're eating in fruits and vegetables and nuts and beans and so forth. It can make such a huge difference. And if you eat some fermented food, and the thing about fermented food is to eat a little bit every day. It's consistency. It's to keep the balance and add more of these healthy bacteria. And then it doesn't seem overwhelming. It's not like you have to redo your whole diet. So that's it for me. Thank you for your time and attention.
So,
Yeah. Okay. So questions.
yeah, so thank you, Jill. I actually have a lot of questions that came in, so we'll get through these.
Better have a drink.
Yeah, take your water now, right? So one of the questions that I had was regarding those emulsifiers. So what is the effect of emulsifiers on gut mucosa and microbiome?
Well, if you have too much of it, it causes an imbalance. It'll cause that dysbiosis. That's why, and the emulsifiers are found in ultra-processed foods. So if that's why the rule is to try to eat less than 30% of your diet is ultra-processed, because in small amounts, it's not going to harm us.
Okay, and I actually had a question came in that said, can you provide examples of what ultra-processed foods would be?
Cookies, cakes, any crackers or snack foods, mayonnaise, different kinds of mayonnaise, margarine a lot of people are eating margarine instead of butter, but margarine's the one that's ultra processed.
Right, okay.
I think
One thing that you might want to remind the viewers is that they need to look at the ingredients.
Oh, that's a good, that's right. Read the ingredients list on anything you're buying in packaged foods, and if you don't have it in your cupboard at home, it's probably ultra processed.
Perfect. Yeah. So yes, when you're buying a bag of chips or, those are, or the cereals, a lot of the cereals that are out on the market, like the sweet cereals, those would all sort of fall into
cereals,
that
right.
category. So thank you for that. Do you have any tips for somebody who might have an autoimmune disorder such as Crohn's disease when you're looking at the gut bacteria as well?
That's important before you make any changes to talk to your doctor, your gastroenterologist, because that's a good point, Maya. If your gut is in really bad shape or you've got problems, you'd have to start out very slow with this and really check with your doctor to see if fermented foods would be okay.
Right, what's appropriate for you.
Yeah.
Can you improve your gut microbiome? Can improving your gut microbiome help improve your memory?
Oh, absolutely. That's what all of this latest research is showing, is that it definitely, you're producing the short chain fatty acids that cross that blood-brain barrier and help your brain.
Great. And then I think the last question I have is about, can you have too much good gut bacteria?
That's a new one on me. I don't know. I'm trying to get as many as I can. So.
All right. And is there I know when you were talking during your presentation at the end, you were talking about how you get 30 plants in a day.
No, it's 30 plants a week.
A week. Oh, sorry, a week. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, because I was like, that's a lot, right? So 30 plants a week. Now, you mentioned coffee, and so there were some different things. Is there a list of different things that people could use? I'm just wondering, because I don't know that they would have thought of coffee as a plant. I didn't know if you had a list that we can share or not.
Well, we do have a list, and actually I distributed in one of the other classes. So there is a list available. You can Google it.
Okay.
Get a list of plants, but I could almost rattle off. There's so many different ones.
Right. Well, and I assume obviously most of your vegetables are going to fall in there.
All the vegetables, all the fruits, all the nuts,
Right. Okay.
like bread, whole wheat bread and sourdough bread and
Wonderful. I just know, sometimes I know you mentioned some different ones and I didn't know if people would think, oh, I didn't really think about that as a plant. So,
I just mentioned coffee because people wouldn't think of that. And tea, even tea comes from plants. So
no, thank you.
chocolate is another. As long as it doesn't have too much sugar.
What was the other one? I didn't hear it.
Oh, chocolate is one, as long as it's not with too much sugar and ultra processed.
All right. Well, good. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to wrap it up with our online audience and let you turn it over so you can answer any questions in person. And I know you've got a little workshop going on. But thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it. So you and Michelle do a wonderful job at pulling all of this information together.
Thanks a lot, Maya.
Thanks. So thank you again for being here today. We are going to be back next week. We'll be continuing on with our Healthcare Decisions Month. And our next class will be on Tuesday, April 23rd at 2 p.m. The class is Navigating Comfort Care from Palliative to Hospice. If you're interested in that class, please give us a call at 520-324-1960 and we'll get you signed up. Thanks again.